My friends, my brothers and sisters in this room, look at me for just a moment and listen not with your ears, but with the part of you that has survived every quiet battle no one ever applauded. Tonight, I am not here to teach you how to fight people who try to bring you down. I am here to teach you how to rise so high that their gravity can no longer reach your soul, because there will always be voices. There will always be whispers. There will always be small hands trying to pull on a life they never built. And the truth you must accept, gently and bravely, is this. Not everyone who stands near you is standing with you. Some people watch your growth the way a shadow watches sunlight. They do not move toward it. They only wait for something to block it. You can be brilliant. You can be faithful. You can be disciplined. You can be generous. You can be quiet and still threaten someone who has never made peace with their own reflection. So if you are wondering why certain people grow uncomfortable when you grow confident, understand this: your becoming reminds them of what they postponed. Your courage reminds them of what they avoided. Your consistency reminds them of what they abandoned. And instead of repairing their own lives, some people try to damage your belief in yours. But listen to me. You do not rise by wrestling with shadows. You rise by becoming light. I want you to hear this clearly, because many of you were taught the wrong survival language. You were taught to explain yourself. You were taught to defend your name. You were taught to prove your goodness. You were taught to respond quickly, loudly, and emotionally when you are misunderstood. But dignity does not raise its voice. Strength does not rush to the microphone. Power does not beg the courtroom of public opinion to declare it innocent. Real elevation is quiet. Real confidence does not announce itself. It walks into rooms and lets the room adjust its temperature. The people who try to bring you down are not always cruel. Some of them are smiling. Some of them send good morning messages. Some of them say they love you. But love that cannot celebrate your growth is not love. It is comfort. It is familiarity. It is fear wearing friendship's clothing. And fear is very creative when it is threatened. Fear becomes gossip. Fear becomes subtle criticism. Fear becomes jokes at your expense. Fear becomes advice you never asked for. Fear becomes sudden concern about your decisions when you finally choose yourself. And I want you to stop asking, why are they doing this to me? That question keeps you tied to their behavior. Ask instead, who am I becoming? Because the moment you shift your attention from their noise to your becoming, you remove yourself from their reach. Let me tell you something quietly but firmly. People who are committed to their own healing do not sabotage someone else's growth. People who are building their own lives do not have spare energy to destroy yours. People who are at peace with themselves are not threatened by your light. So when someone tries to bring you down, it is not evidence of your failure. It is confirmation of your movement. But now, let me show you how to rise above them without saying a single word. You rise above them by refusing to hand them your emotional steering wheel. You rise above them by refusing to make their opinion the headline of your internal newspaper. You rise above them by refusing to shrink your future to make their present more comfortable. You rise above them by continuing your work when applause disappears. You rise above them by becoming unrecognizable to the version of you that once begged for permission to shine. Silence, when chosen from strength, is not weakness. Silence is a boundary. Silence is strategy. Silence is self-respect in its most mature form, because not every battle deserves your breath. Not every comment deserves your energy. Not every misunderstanding deserves your explanation. Some things deserve your progress. Some things deserve your discipline. Some things deserve your devotion to the life you said you wanted when nobody was watching. I know some of you in this room are tired. You are not tired of working. You are tired of carrying the emotional weight of other people's insecurity. You are tired of being the strong one. You are tired of adjusting your tone so others do not feel small. You are tired of editing your joy so others do not feel left behind. But let me free you from a lie that has been quietly exhausting your spirit. It is not your responsibility to make other people comfortable with your courage. It is not your responsibility to lower your standards so someone else does not have to raise theirs. It is not your responsibility to remain small so others do not feel exposed. Your only responsibility is to become honest with the gift that was placed inside you. And that gift did not come with an apology attached. It came with an assignment. It came with a responsibility to grow. It came with a responsibility to heal what hurt you, so you do not bleed on people who never cut you. It came with a responsibility to build a life so rooted that storms do not convince you to abandon your own ground. You do not need revenge. Revenge keeps you emotionally employed by people who are not paying you anything of value. You do not need to expose them. Truth has its own schedule. You do not need to outtalk them. Time speaks with a voice no human can silence. You need something far more powerful than retaliation. You need regulation. You need clarity. You need consistency. Because when you continue to show up calm, focused, disciplined, and emotionally unmovable, something extraordinary happens. The people who came to provoke you realize there is no performance. The people who came to distract you realize there is no invitation. The people who came to derail you realize there is no access. And access is what they were really seeking. Not your pain, your attention, not your breakdown, your reaction, not your failure, your emotional availability to their chaos. Do not confuse cruelty with closeness. Not everyone who knows your story deserves to continue reading the next chapter. Some people were only meant to witness the beginning of your survival, not the unfolding of your success. And that is not betrayal. That is evolution. You cannot rise while carrying relationships that require you to stay the same. You cannot rise while entertaining conversations that weaken your self-trust. You cannot rise while rehearsing old wounds to people who secretly benefit from your insecurity. I want you to hear this part very carefully. You do not rise by changing them. You rise by changing your tolerance. Your tolerance for disrespect. Your tolerance for emotional manipulation. Your tolerance for inconsistency. Your tolerance for being the only one growing in rooms that keep recycling the same excuses. Your tolerance sets the ceiling of your life, and many of you are standing in rooms with ceilings far lower than the sky that belongs to you. When people try to bring you down, they often do it subtly. They question your timing. They question your readiness. They question your motives. They question your confidence. But they never question their own fear of your forward movement. So stop defending your pace. Stop defending your path. Stop defending your silence. Stop defending your distance. You do not owe everyone a front row seat to your healing. Some people only knew the version of you who was bleeding. They do not recognize the version of you who learned how to stop the bleeding. They are nostalgic for your vulnerability because it made them feel needed. But healed people do not need rescuers. They need witnesses. They need partners. They need peace. And peace requires courage. Because peace sometimes means walking away without an explanation that would finally make you feel understood. Peace sometimes means letting people misinterpret you and choosing not to interrupt their misunderstanding. Peace sometimes means accepting that being respected by yourself is more important than being liked by everyone else. You do not rise above people by hardening your heart. You rise above people by softening your attachment to outcomes you cannot control. You cannot control what they say. You cannot control what they assume. You cannot control what story they tell about you in rooms you no longer enter. But you can control how gently you treat your own nervous system. You can control how faithfully you protect your focus. You can control how deeply you commit to your growth. You can control how honestly you show up to your calling. And your calling does not need a committee. Your calling does not need consensus. Your calling does not need permission. It only needs your courage to answer it quietly, consistently, and completely. I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine waking up so anchored in who you are becoming that criticism sounds like background noise instead of a personal emergency. Imagine being so disciplined in your habits that sabotage cannot find a doorway. Imagine being so rooted in your values that manipulation cannot move you. Imagine being so proud of your integrity that you no longer chase validation. That is what it looks like to rise above people without a word. Not dramatic exits. Not public announcements. Not emotional speeches. But alignment. Alignment between your values and your behavior. Alignment between your dreams and your discipline. Alignment between your inner voice and your outer choices. Your life becomes the message. Your peace becomes the protest. Your progress becomes the reply. And there is something else you must accept if you are serious about elevation. Sometimes the people who try to bring you down are not enemies. They are mirrors showing you where you still crave approval. They are mirrors showing you where your confidence still wobbles. They are mirrors showing you where you still outsource your worth. Do not curse the mirror. Use the reflection. Let it teach you what still needs strengthening inside you. Because when your self-trust becomes unshakable, their opinions lose their grip. When your identity becomes stable, their criticism loses its power. When your purpose becomes clear, their distractions lose their appeal. And I promise you this, the higher you rise, the quieter your need to be understood becomes. You stop explaining your boundaries. You stop justifying your growth. You stop announcing your healing. You stop negotiating your self-respect. You become less interesting to chaos and more interesting to clarity. Less reactive, more intentional, less available to drama, more available to destiny. Some of you are standing at a threshold tonight. On one side is the familiar pain of being misunderstood but accepted. On the other side is the unfamiliar peace of being aligned but sometimes lonely. Choose the peace. Loneliness can be healed with connection. But self-betrayal rots slowly and silently from the inside. You were not created to perform survival for people who refuse to grow. You were not created to dim your insight to preserve fragile egos. You were not created to shrink your voice inside your own chest. You were created to rise. And rising does not require permission. It requires devotion. Devotion to your healing. Devotion to your discipline. Devotion to your integrity. Devotion to the quiet, daily choices no one celebrates but your future depends on. So when they speak about you, keep building. When they doubt you, keep training. When they misjudge you, keep refining. When they misunderstand you, keep becoming. Let your life become so full, so focused, so rooted, that you no longer have room to carry resentment. Let your days become so intentional that you do not have spare energy for bitterness. Let your nights become so peaceful that you no longer rehearse conversations that never deserved your silence to begin with. You do not rise above people by stepping on them. You rise above people by stepping into yourself. And when you finally stand tall in the truth of who you are, unashamed of your growth, unapologetic about your healing, undistracted by small opinions, unbothered by borrowed judgments, anchored in your purpose, and faithful to your becoming, you will realize something extraordinary. You never needed to defeat them. You only needed to outgrow the version of you that believed their approval was required for your freedom. My friends, look at me for a moment, not as a speaker standing in front of you, but as a witness to something sacred unfolding in your own life right now. Because every person in this room is learning the same quiet lesson, even if you arrived here carrying different stories. How to become unreachable to smallness without becoming unkind. How to grow without growing cold. How to protect your spirit without hardening your heart. How to rise without stepping on the dignity of your own humanity. There is a dangerous misunderstanding in our world today. People think strength must look sharp. They think boundaries must look cruel. They think growth must come with distance, silence, and emotional armor so thick that nothing human can pass through it. But the deepest power you will ever hold is the ability to remain soft in a world that keeps training you to become sharp. And the bravest discipline you will ever practice is learning how to walk away from smallness without carrying bitterness in your hands. Because smallness is not about money. Smallness is not about education. Smallness is not about where you started. Smallness is a mindset that survives by shrinking everything around it. Smallness is fear disguised as certainty. Smallness is insecurity dressed up as opinion. Smallness is control pretending to be care. Smallness is the need to dominate conversations because silence would expose the emptiness underneath. Smallness is laughing at someone else's courage so you do not have to face your own hesitation. Smallness is dismissing what you cannot understand. Smallness is resenting what you secretly wish you had the nerve to attempt. And if you are honest with yourself, you have met smallness in other people. But if you are brave with yourself, you will admit you have also met smallness in your own thoughts. Because becoming unreachable to smallness does not start with cutting people off. It starts with cleaning your inner language. It starts with noticing the way you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. It starts with noticing the way you downplay your own progress so you do not attract attention. It starts with noticing the way you hesitate before celebrating your own growth because you fear making others uncomfortable. It starts with noticing how often you trade your truth for belonging. And I want you to understand something gently tonight. You cannot rise above smallness in the world if you are still entertaining smallness inside your own chest. You cannot demand respect for your growth while quietly negotiating your worth in private. You cannot protect your future while feeding habits that keep your past comfortable. So when I say become unreachable to smallness, I am not talking about building walls around your life. I am talking about building standards inside your soul. I am talking about the daily, invisible choices that determine what gets access to your attention, your time, your energy, and your emotional availability. Because smallness survives on access. Smallness needs proximity. Smallness needs reaction. Smallness needs emotional permission to stay relevant. And when you quietly withdraw that permission, without announcement, without drama, without bitterness, something powerful happens. You stop feeding what cannot grow you. But here is where the real work begins. Because it is easy to walk away in anger. It is easy to withdraw with contempt. It is easy to become distant with resentment. It is easy to build boundaries that feel like punishment. It is much harder to walk away with dignity. It is much harder to remain gentle without remaining available to disrespect. It is much harder to protect your peace without poisoning your heart. Unkindness is often disguised as self-respect. Coldness is often disguised as healing. Silence is often disguised as maturity when it is really avoidance. But real growth does not require you to become emotionally unreachable to people who deserve tenderness. It only requires you to become emotionally unavailable to patterns that drain your integrity. Because there is a difference between protecting your energy and punishing people for being human. There is a difference between setting a boundary and building a weapon. There is a difference between choosing yourself and abandoning compassion. And if you are not careful, you will escape smallness only to recreate it in a more socially acceptable form. Smallness that says, I don't need anyone. Smallness that says, I never get hurt anymore. Smallness that says, I am above all of this. But emotional superiority is still smallness. Isolation is not strength. Disconnection is not peace. Numbness is not healing. Becoming unreachable to smallness does not mean becoming unreachable to love. It means becoming unreachable to chaos. It means becoming unreachable to manipulation. It means becoming unreachable to emotional bait. It means becoming unreachable to conversations that do not respect your growth. It means becoming unreachable to people who only know how to connect through criticism, comparison, and control. And you must learn how to do this without turning your kindness into a casualty. Because kindness is not weakness. Kindness is discipline. Kindness is emotional mastery. Kindness is choosing not to export your pain into other people's lives. Kindness is refusing to let disappointment transform into cruelty. Kindness is refusing to let betrayal rewrite your character. Kindness is refusing to let someone else's inability to love you properly convince you that love itself is dangerous. Some of you in this room have become tired of being generous. Not with money, with understanding, with patience, with grace, with emotional availability. You are tired of overextending. You are tired of being the one who explains. You are tired of being the one who absorbs. You are tired of being the one who forgives first. But listen to me carefully. Do not confuse the need for better boundaries with the desire to become emotionally armored. You do not need thicker skin. You need clearer self-respect. You do not need to become colder. You need to become more selective. Selective with your time. Selective with your emotional labor. Selective with your loyalty. Selective with your vulnerability. Selective with your explanations. Selective with your forgiveness. Because forgiveness does not mean reopening access. Compassion does not mean tolerating harm. Understanding does not mean enduring disrespect. You can be kind and still be unavailable. You can be warm and still be firm. You can be gentle and still be immovable. And this is where most people struggle. They think kindness requires compliance. They think love requires endurance. They think loyalty requires silence. They think maturity requires swallowing pain quietly. But maturity is not self-erasure. Maturity is self-alignment. Maturity is knowing when to speak, and knowing when silence protects you more than your voice ever could. Maturity is choosing responses that do not betray your nervous system. Maturity is choosing conversations that do not dismantle your confidence. Maturity is choosing environments that do not train you to doubt yourself. You become unreachable to smallness the moment you stop explaining your worth to people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You become unreachable to smallness the moment you stop performing emotional labor for people who refuse to grow emotionally. You become unreachable to smallness the moment you stop chasing emotional closure from people who avoid emotional responsibility. You become unreachable to smallness the moment you stop confusing attention with connection. You become unreachable to smallness the moment you stop allowing chaos to feel familiar. But I want you to hear something important. Smallness does not always arrive with bad intentions. Sometimes smallness arrives wrapped in humor. Sometimes smallness arrives as concern. Sometimes smallness arrives as advice. Sometimes smallness arrives as tradition. Sometimes smallness arrives as loyalty to people who raised you, shaped you, loved you, and still cannot walk with the version of you that is emerging. And that is one of the hardest forms of emotional courage you will ever practice. Learning how to love people without shrinking yourself for their comfort. Learning how to honor your history without sacrificing your future. Learning how to appreciate where you came from without being sentenced to remain there emotionally. Learning how to stay respectful without staying restricted. Because not everyone who loves you knows how to support your growth. Not everyone who cares about you knows how to let you change. Not everyone who helped you survive knows how to celebrate who you are becoming. And this does not make them evil. It makes them human. But it does not make their limitations your responsibility. So you learn how to hold your love without holding yourself back. You learn how to show gratitude without surrendering direction. You learn how to speak kindly without speaking dishonestly. You learn how to maintain connection without betraying your calling. Becoming unreachable to smallness without becoming unkind requires emotional maturity, so deep that you stop needing people to understand your boundaries in order to respect them yourself. You stop announcing your growth. You stop broadcasting your healing. You stop defending your decisions. You stop auditioning for emotional approval. You stop translating your soul into language that fits other people's comfort. You become rooted, quietly, steadily, unapologetically, not loudly, not dramatically, not with revenge, not with performative distance, but with consistency. And consistency is one of the most threatening energies to smallness, because smallness thrives on reaction. Smallness thrives on unpredictability. Smallness thrives on emotional entanglement. Smallness thrives on unfinished conversations. Smallness thrives on unresolved attachment. But consistency starves it. When you show up the same way every day, grounded, focused, emotionally regulated, and internally anchored, the drama cannot find oxygen. The manipulation cannot find leverage. The guilt cannot find its old doorway. The chaos cannot find its favorite audience. You do not have to confront smallness. You outgrow it. And the way you outgrow it is not by becoming distant from people. It is by becoming intimate with your own standards. Your standard for how you speak to yourself. Your standard for how you allow others to speak to you. Your standard for how conflict is handled. Your standard for how repair is offered. Your standard for how accountability is practiced. Your standard for how your time is respected. Your standard for how your dreams are spoken about in your presence. Because when your standards become clear, your explanations become unnecessary. People adjust, or they exit, and neither outcome requires cruelty. But here is the part that separates emotional growth from emotional performance. When people do not adjust, you must resist the temptation to punish them for not changing. You do not need to make them feel small to prove that you are no longer available to smallness. You do not need to humiliate them. You do not need to expose them. You do not need to shame them. You do not need to harden yourself into someone you do not recognize. Your power is in your neutrality. Your power is in your emotional cleanliness. Your power is in your ability to walk away without contaminating your future with resentment. Because bitterness is heavy, and heavy things slow your ascent. You do not rise by carrying emotional debt from people who could not meet you where you were growing. You rise by releasing what cannot walk with you. Quietly, gratefully, without performance, without hatred, without a speech. And I know some of you are thinking right now about specific people. You can feel it in your chest. You can feel it in your breath. You can feel the memory of certain conversations tightening your shoulders. You can feel the echo of certain criticisms still lingering in your nervous system. And I want you to know something deeply comforting. You do not need closure from people who were committed to misunderstanding you. You do not need validation from people who only recognize you when you are useful to them. You do not need approval from people who become uneasy when you become confident. You do not need reconciliation with every person who could not grow with you. Closure is not something someone else hands you. Closure is something you build when you stop reopening emotional doors that keep draining your peace. And kindness does not require you to keep reopening those doors. Kindness simply requires you to close them without slamming. Kindness requires you to exit without contempt. Kindness requires you to release without revenge. Kindness requires you to leave people with their dignity intact, even when they could not protect yours. Because one day you will look back on this season, and the most important thing will not be who you defeated. It will be who you became while protecting yourself. It will be how gently you learned to hold your own pain. It will be how responsibly you learned to hold other people's imperfections. It will be how clearly you learned to choose peace without punishing humanity. It will be how deeply you learn to trust your own direction without requiring constant agreement. Becoming unreachable to smallness is an internal upgrade. It is when your emotional radar becomes refined. You notice the tone of conversations before they become draining. You notice the energy of rooms before they become toxic. You notice patterns before they become pain. You notice how your body reacts before your mind starts negotiating. You listen to your nervous system. You listen to your intuition. You listen to the quiet discomfort that tells you something is no longer aligned. And instead of explaining it away, you honor it. Without aggression, without accusation, without emotional theatrics, you simply move differently, you respond differently, you engage differently, you invest differently, you prioritize differently, you love differently. And this is not because you have become guarded. It is because you have become grounded. You are no longer desperate to be chosen. You are no longer anxious about being included. You are no longer addicted to being needed. You are no longer terrified of being misunderstood. You are no longer bargaining with your boundaries. You are no longer rehearsing your worth. You are no longer negotiating your self-respect. You are no longer shrinking to keep emotional peace with people who refuse to grow. But you are still kind. You still speak gently. You still listen carefully. You still forgive sincerely. You still offer compassion. You still honor shared history. You still acknowledge pain. You still wish people well. You still pray for their healing, even when it no longer includes your presence. You still remember what it felt like to be uncertain. You still remember what it felt like to be afraid. You still remember what it felt like to be learning. And because you remember, you do not become cruel to people who are behind you on the path. You simply refuse to walk backward with them. You do not need to announce your distance. You do not need to justify your boundaries. You do not need to over-explain your silence. You do not need to defend your growth. You do not need to convince anyone that your life is becoming healthier. Your nervous system will know. Your sleep will know. Your creativity will know. Your relationships will know. Your future will know. And the most beautiful part of becoming unreachable to smallness without becoming unkind is that your life begins to feel lighter. Not because fewer people exist in it, but because fewer people control your emotional weather. Not because you stopped caring, but because you learned how to care without collapsing. Not because you hardened, but because you healed. You learn how to stay open without staying exposed. You learn how to stay loving without staying available to harm. You learn how to stay present without staying trapped. You learn how to stay human without staying small. And as you continue growing, something else will quietly change. The kind of people who can walk with you will become different. The conversations will become deeper. The respect will become mutual. The energy will become calmer. The laughter will become safer. The disagreements will become more honest. The love will become more secure. And you will realize that you did not lose people. You released versions of connection that could not support the life you were building. You did not abandon anyone. You honored the truth of who you were becoming. You did not become unreachable to love. You became unreachable to limitation. You became unreachable to emotional chaos. You became unreachable to patterns that kept you doubting yourself. You became unreachable to smallness. Without becoming unkind,